Did you know there was a time when white children and black children were not allowed to go to the same school? This was about 60 years ago, so maybe your grandparents or your great-grandparents remember when segregation, or the separation of people, was the law. Our friend and museum volunteer Terry Walden is going to share with you some information about the time when the laws changed and all children started to learn together.
Today, we're going to learn about a time when children were discriminated against at school. Now, this word is civil rights. Civil rights are basic rights that every citizen has under the law. And that includes things like religion, what church you can go to, speech, free speech, also your assembly, and all those things should not depend on whether you have a disability, how old you are, what gender you are, whether you're a boy or a girl, your skin color, your religion, or your nationality, where you're from, what country that you're from. Everybody under our laws should be treated equally. Now, there was a time many, many years ago when your grandparents were young that black children were not allowed to go to school with white children. And this was called segregation. Now, other things were segregated too, not just schools. Many other things were segregated too. Have you ever heard of this? Segregation? What other things do you think might have been segregated? Now, this might surprise you, but restaurants were segregated, water fountains were segregated, bathrooms were segregated, neighborhoods. When you rode on a bus, you had to sit in a certain place. Those were segregated. Even sections of the library. There were places where white children could check out all of these books, but black children were only allowed a little certain part of the library. And also swimming pools. They were also segregated. People at the time called this system separate but equal. Now, that doesn't sound very equal to me, and I'm going to show you how this played out in Batesville, in the schools in Batesville. They said that schools were different, but that they all had the same good things. Now, I'm going to show you two numbers here. You see those numbers? Now, the one on the left, 918, that's how much money that a black school teacher was paid in 1948 with 6 years experience. Okay, the number on the right, 1,305, that's how much that a white school teacher was paid in Batesville with 6 years experience. The same amount of experience. Does that look equal to you? Now I have some more numbers. This one, you're really going to see. Okay, this number, 150. This is the value of all the furniture and the equipment in a black school. Now, there were 81 students in the school at the time. They had, here's some of the things that they had. They had a pit toilet. You know what that is? That's like going outside to an outhouse. They had no office, like where the secretary and the principal sit. They had no auditorium. They had no gymnasium, and they had no science lab. Can you imagine a school like that? All right, now let's look at this number. This is the value of furniture and equipment in the white school. Now, they were both governed, they were public schools, they were both governed by the same school board and the same principal, and all, or not the same principal, but the same superintendent, all that. And this one had 253 students, this one had 81 students. So it really isn't even equal. I mean, even if you took the number of students and multiplied that, it's nowhere near the same. Okay, now the white school had city sewer. They did have an office. They did have an auditorium. They did not have a gymnasium, but they did have a science lab. So, does that look equal to you? All right, so during the civil rights movement of the 1950s, this is the word civil rights movement, and that is a time where you fought for the rights of a given population in a certain section of the population. And the importance of it is that we should protect all citizens, not just some. During the civil rights movement of the 50s, many people fought for the right of all students to go to school together and get a good education. In 1954, the United States government finally agreed that it was right for all children to have a good education, and they determined that black children should be able to go to school with white children. That was called, another big word, integration. Okay, that means when separate people or separate things are put together. Now, not everybody was happy about that. Some people were really mad about that. There was a great big school in Little Rock called Little Rock Central High School, and the building was so beautiful it was known nationwide. The architecture was beautiful, and it was very well built. 9 students were selected in 1957 to be able to go to the all-white Central High School. That was the beginning of integration. So what do you think happened when they tried to go to school? Well, riots broke out. Now, we've seen a few of those this summer on the news, but riots broke out among parents and adults. Now, you notice it didn't say riots broke out among students. Riots broke out among parents and adults. And the governor of Arkansas at the time was Orville Faubus. And Orville Faubus had within his power to mobilize the National Guard, which was a group of soldiers. They were no longer serving in the military, but they're like what we call weekend warriors. And he had the ability to mobilize them. So he told 10,000 National Guardsmen that they had to come to Little Rock High School. And what do you think he wanted the soldiers to do? Well, he wanted them to block the students from entering. And there were actually some soldiers here in Batesville that were deployed to go to Little Rock. Now, the governor said it was for the students' own protection because he thought violence and bloodshed might break out among students if they entered the building. So, this building right here, the museum, was the building where the National Guardsmen drilled and they learned how to be good soldiers, and they were obligated to follow the governor's orders. But the President of the United States, President Dwight D. Eisenhower, he federalized the National Guard. Now, what does that mean? It means that they didn't have to take orders from the governor of Arkansas, but they were to take orders from him. And he said that he wanted them to protect those students so they could go in the building. And he sent 1,200 members of the U.S. Army's 101st Airborne Division from Fort Campbell, Kentucky, to also help ensure the integration. Now, the soldiers, who had rifles and bayonets, escorted the students into the building, and they kept the mob at bay. Now, the mob outside were parents and adults, and they said some of them didn't even come from Batesville or Little Rock, or some of the people that were in the mob outside. Some of them came in from out of state and just created a ruckus. While parents and adults were angry, most of the students just wanted their lives to go back to normal. One student told a big newspaper in New York, "If the parents would just go home and leave us alone, we'd work this thing out." That's pretty true, isn't it? One of the black students, Ernest Green, said, "Things would be a lot better if the grown-ups wouldn't mix in. The kids don't really have anything against us." It was a really, really long year. And the soldiers, the 101st Airborne, they would take the students around the building. They escorted them all over the building because, you know, they didn't want anybody to hurt them. And there was some harassment. There were a few things there were things said that weren't kind. And there were, you know, sometimes there was a mild incident of harassment. A football player knocked a student down, and somebody got their books knocked out, and there were some people that were acting very rude and mean. And after that year, there was only one senior out of all those 9, and he did graduate and became the first African American graduate of Central High School. At the end of the school year, Governor Faubus closed all of the 3 high schools in Little Rock, and he said it was to prevent more violence, but he really just didn't want them integrated. So the schools remained closed the whole next year. And some of you may know in Little Rock all the private schools that are around, but some of them started in that time period. The private school started when they didn't have public school in all the high schools in Little Rock. Now, what do you think the schools in Batesville were like during this time? I'm going to show you a picture of a school that's right down the road. It's called Miller School, and it was built in 1952. And it was for Negroes and African Americans, and as of 2010, they used that building for North Arkansas NADC, but I think even that doesn't meet there anymore. I saw a for sale sign down there. It said the building is for sale. Okay, in that building, in Miller School, it's going to show you some pictures of students. There was let's see, children were all dressed in good clothing. It says back here, this is the description: girls in skirts and blouses and dresses, socks and dress shoes, boys in jeans and shirts and pants, socks and shoes. That's what we had to wear to school when I was little too. We didn't get to wear pants. We had to wear dresses and blouses, and you know, there was more of a dress code back then. There was a desk for each child, but that's what it looked like. And these people over here are like members of a school board and teachers. Here's a basketball team from Miller School. They were the 1952 District 6 basketball champions. They played against Newport, Augusta, Parkin, Tuckerman, Van Hill. All right, this is a glee club, and that is like a choir. We don't call them glee clubs anymore, but that was from 1946 and 1947. That was the Batesville Junior High Black Glee Club. Let me see. Oh, this one is a rhythm band. It doesn't have a year on it, but it was from Miller School. And here's another one. It's kind of hard to see this one. It's from an old photograph. And those are some of the pictures of Miller School. Now, also you might be interested to know that Lyon College did not have black students until 1971, or in the 1970s. And in 1971, they were the only all-white basketball team in the whole state. And then by the mid-70s, half the team was black, and there were 50 black students that attended Lyon College. That happened just within 4 or 5 years. And gradual change, the students moved faster than the administration did. I wanted to talk to you about when Batesville schools were integrated. I know you probably know some people in town, maybe your grandparents, that would remember this time. In 1963, Dr. Wesley Ketz, who at the time was the Batesville School Board president, announced that the Batesville schools had been discussing integration, and he said, "It's not a physical problem. but it's going to be an emotional problem. And on 1965, an announcement was made that the only black school, the Ethel O. Miller School, the only one that was in north central Arkansas, would be closed in 3 years. And what they decided to do was do a phased out closing. So they started with the youngest children, and in 1965 and in 1966, the first 4 grades of the school were integrated into the other schools, which at the time probably would have been like Central and East, I think was the other one. And then in 1966 and 1967, the 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade would be merged. And then last, but of course not least, in 1967 and 1968, grades 9 through 12 would be, the classes at Miller School would be eliminated, and the students would begin at Batesville High School. Also, the teachers that went, there were 2 teachers from Miller School that came to teach on a part-time student or part-time status at Central. There was a teacher at Central whose name was Lucille Johnston, and she was a 3rd grade teacher at the time at Central School. And she remembers that 5 little black girls came into the 1st grade there, and 2 teachers from Miller School came in with her, with the students. And she said, I got those 5 little girls in the 3rd grade. When they came up to 3rd grade, she said, we got wonderful cooperation from all the parents. If you corrected their child, they would come and talk to you about it in a nice way. And that always made you feel good about that this was a positive experience. And she said, I always felt that Batesville teachers bent over backwards to make this work, and it did work.